Due to the advent of platforms such as Reddit, Discord, and other various social media platforms, the stereotypes that follow trans girls have only become more visible over the past couple years. One of these stereotypes that has predominantly shown up, and one that I can identify with quite strongly, is the trans girl programmer. The trans girl programmer is simply just a trans girl who likes to program. Maybe they're studying computer science, maybe they are already in the field. But one thing is that I know is that this stereotype is founded. There is a lot, and I mean a disproportionate amount of trans girls that choose programming as a career path or as a hobby. And this video is simply just to explain why I think that is. Research into the field of trans women, and especially their role in STEM, and just generally LGBTQ people in STEM, is very, very limited. There has been little research, and I could only find at most one relevant article for this topic. A quote I have from one of the researchers from that paper, Elizabeth Kersey, says that when it comes to marginalized sexual and gender identities, the research literature remains largely in the closet. Researchers seldom address the impact of representation of queer people in mathematics. My approach to this research was threefold before making this video. The first is that I did some internet research on forums like Quora and also Reddit, whatever a Google search could realistically give me. Then on multiple Discord servers, I put out a question for people who identified as trans to answer, specifically trans girls, and use those questions and answers to further develop my ideas. And then finally, I did some searching on places like JSTOR, Google Scholar, ProQuest. Could only really find one relevant article, which was by Elizabeth Kersey, and that's all I could really do. Everything I'm going to be talking about is realistically all speculative. I do not have a background in psychology. I'm really just a high school student. And I'm only going to be sharing my opinions on why certain things happen and my observations and what I have learned from talking to multiple trans girls and women within the STEM field or with STEM as a hobby as to why this phenomenon happens. The first reason that a lot of trans women go into STEM is because, quite simply, they were raised as males. Because they are considered male, they are more encouraged to go into STEM fields because STEM fields are just societally more encouraged to males. One example I got from one of the people I talked to is that they were going to be going into engineering because they were encouraged by their parents to try out engineering, and because computer science is something that is helpful to know, they found computer science and found they have a passion for it, so they pursued computer science. So this can be a pretty common way of, introducing people to computer science who are trans women, is because they are born as male, they're encouraged into STEM, and because they're encouraged into STEM, even if it's not directly a computer science field, it can funnel them into computer science. Now, some other people aren't even funneled into, say, engineering and then into computer science. Some of them are just directly encouraged, hey, you should do computer science, whether because directly they're a male or because that's just what society says. And one example I got of this was one of my friends who just said, you know what, the reason I started programming is because my dad told me to try it when I was 7. Speaking on what society says is that computer science kind of falls somewhere in the middle of the boy and girl activities that fall out there. So, for example, sports are considered fairly masculine, dolls are considered quite feminine for younger children. However, computer science feels like it falls somewhere in the middle. It leans more masculine within society's standards, but it's not directly feminine or masculine. And this can be quite appealing for trans girls, even if they don't know they're trans yet. And one quote I got from a Quora article I read was that there's nothing inherently male about computers or the internet, but if you already type over 70 words per minute and know a bit about computers, it's often a smart career choice to just say, I already know some things about computer science and about how computers work, might as well just get the foundation. And one thing that this Quora article says is that IT is male dominated, but it is not intrinsically male. And the final thing is that those who are born as male are just more inclined to do these STEM jobs because they will be afforded privileges for doing so. The article I read by Elizabeth Kersey says, the first dimension, gender category oppression, refers to the degree of privilege or oppression one experiences based on the gender category to which one is presumed to belong, whether man, woman, or non-binary. Now, what this says, and I believe there was also a second dimension to this, is that if you are assumed to be male, you are afforded more privilege, and not necessarily privilege, but are just less targeted for doing computer science. So this is a reason why even before, and all these are big reasons why even before trans women find out that they're trans, they can gravitate more towards a path of STEM or computer science. The second reason why I believe this happens a lot is that trans people tend to grow up just generally online and playing video games. So because of this, they are afforded a level of technical literacy that not everyone has. And a lot of these people tend to play MMOs and just other generally online games. And this affords people who are trans and just everyone in general a level of anonymity and dissociation. For example, when I was growing up, I'd always pick the female character in games, and even if you don't know that you are trans, the fact that you are given that ability to be someone else can be extremely influential in pointing people to wanting to know how computers work. For example, in case in point, Minecraft. Minecraft boomed as a game for education and as a game for teaching people the value and the ideas of programming. For example, redstone, command blocks, mods, and plugins are all things that are intrinsically STEM related that can be just done with Minecraft. And one of the friends I talked to, Caddy, she said that I want to learn how Minecraft works and the secret language of computers that made it work. That's not the exact quote. When you play a game and you are young, you can often be fascinated with, whoa, this game that I have an emotional attachment to because it lets me be someone else or lets me dissociate from the real world is something I'm just interested in, and I want to learn how it works. The third biggest reason as to why I believe a lot of trans women go into STEM is that there is a big, and I mean big, difference between text interaction and personal interaction, especially for trans women. And I consider this to fall into two categories, kind of the world rejects you and you reject yourself. When you are coding a product or when you're coding a game or anything, the actual pipeline from an idea to a product or from work to a product doesn't really involve human interaction. You can create the whole thing theoretically anonymously or with little external not acknowledgement other than just your name, that it can be very appealing because you don't necessarily have to physically be the one to sell the product, say go to door, or be in a retail store selling something. One of the people I talked to, I asked them why they started coding, and they answered that they understood computers better than people. That, it was also the one thing they were really good at, and they just didn't know how they would survive before computers, because having to talk to people, especially growing up as a trans girl, might seem easy to others, but it's realistically, when you're constantly self-conscious of yourself, it gives you a lot of social anxiety when talking to other people, and this is something that I've experienced myself. And one other thing about this is that when you're creating this product, this computer science product, a website, a game, whatever it is, it's text. That's all it boils down to. It's just text. And it's realistically probably one of the best ways to create your own thing without really being judged for being trans, because you don't even have to tell people. You don't have to involve your transness. One of the other people I talked to that I quoted said that when they program and when they create things, that it gives them the promise of a non-judgmental and creative environment and satisfaction. It became an escape for her, and ultimately one of the few places of pride she had at the time. To finish off this point is another quote I have from Elizabeth Kersey, and says that queer students experienced mathematics and other STEM fields as objective and independent of identity, of being trans, yet simultaneously exclusionary of their queer identities. When you're trans, you can create something that is completely separate from your identity, yet it excludes that identity. It's a bit of a double-edged sword. The final reason I have for why a lot of trans girls have gone into STEM and computer science is just the office culture has shifted over time, where the product is so distant from the office that's creating it that the way people present themselves within a tech environment has been probably one of the quicker and faster shifting environments. For example, hair color, dress code, stuff like that, since the 2010s or 2000s have been slowly growing more relaxed and sometimes even just by now gone. And that, plus all the benefits and quote unquote progressive benefits like lounges, free food, and on top of the fact that it is a lucrative field that can pay for independence from parents and from other people, and also can pay for transition, it can just be, even for someone who doesn't necessarily enjoy computer science, it can be something that's very, very tempting for a trans girl to pursue. That really applies to most STEM fields. They're lucrative. So when it comes to needing to transition, when it comes to needing to have independence, which is something I often hear a lot from trans girls, that ability to have money and have that monetary independence is important. And that can be a factor for many people who just didn't grow up playing games or did not grow up, encouraged by society, their parents, their siblings, to learn a STEM field. On the final point about offices and tech jobs is that, and take this with a grain of salt because I got most of this information from my partner and I wasn't able to find too much research because a lot of this stuff is subjective, is that being trans did not necessarily become easy, it just became more possible than other fields. And tech jobs in general most likely impacted the internet and trans girl culture more than trans girls and the internet actually impacted tech jobs. So to some extent, tech jobs and trans girls are slightly intertwined in the sense that they become very appealing to trans girls, therefore they impact that community, and it kind of creates an ever looping cycle that's been going on since maybe 2000 or 2010 or even earlier, depending on how early you want to start the trend. The issues with all of this, though, is that yes, it is evident that there is a lot of trans girls in STEM, and everything I've said up to now is my speculation after some research and some questioning as to why this happens, but this is more speculation as to what might happen in the future, which is that this is still a stereotype, and I fear that it will become or is already becoming a self-perpetuating stereotype where as more trans girls go into STEM, the more STEM gets associated with trans girls and the more trans girls are to some extent societally forced into STEM, much the same way that a lot of males before transitioning or before finding out that they're trans are forced societally or pressured societally into STEM jobs. The final reminder I have is that trans women are still heavily discriminated against. Trans girls need a community, and that might just be a good thing in the sense that the trans girl program or stereotype gives trans girls a community. Another quote from Elizabeth Carasy is that many of the queer students in these studies found strength and resilience in their queer community. But there were some transgender women who did not view being queer essential to their identity and didn't feel the same sense of community. Those who have a community tend to be better off and safer. And being a trans girl who codes gives you a big community. But the other issue is that there's trans girls who code and don't feel like they belong to that community just because maybe they're not a cat girl, nya nya. The issue is that for those trans girls that code, they don't have maybe a community that they like, and it becomes an issue where we need to make the trans community as open as possible, especially within the trans programmer community, to everyone. Welcome everyone in STEM into our little community or our big community, and make it so that we all can rely on each other, because the going does get tough. I started off by saying that there's not really any research into these things, and the issue with that becomes that without research, everything I just said is all speculation. Maybe it's founded. Maybe there are legitimate psychological effects that can be found from my basic research, but I can't know. I don't have a background in psychology. Maybe all I said is just speculative bullshit. Maybe. But I know for a fact that if people with more psychological backgrounds and gender studies backgrounds and just general college backgrounds, I'm a high school student, the more they look into this, the more they might be able to find trends and maybe able to find things that are able to not just explain why trans women go into STEM, but more importantly, how society impacts gender, how society impacts people who are LGBT or trans, and how trans people impact the greater community. And this video, if nothing else, serves as two things. One, hopefully you learn something. Hopefully you look at this video and are able to say, hey, I identify with some of this. I now can look at myself and see more why I have chosen the path I did. But more importantly, I hope this gets to some researchers and makes them say, hey, I gotta look into this. Well, that's about it. There are many reasons why a trans girl might choose programming, and hopefully I listed some of the ones that are most important. And since I'm guessing the majority of the people watching are trans women, allies, and those in programming and STEM, have fun coding, have fun debugging, stay safe. Since I know a lot of you are going to enjoy this another second time, nya nya.